Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part 3 of your legislative Lunch and Learn series. Today, we are going to talk about how to advocate and or lobby, what the difference is, if there is a difference. And I am your host for today, Sarah Lochner, Executive Director of the Coalition of Local Health Officials. I use she, her pronouns, and with me is Jeston Black. Justin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeston Black. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Multnomah County.
And I asked Justin to be my co-host for today because he and I spent at least 4 years, maybe 4.5 years as a lobbying duo. So we had a lot of fun doing that, and I thought he would be a great person to share the stage and make this webinar a little bit more entertaining. So we will dive right in. So what is the difference between lobbying and advocacy? There's not much of a difference, to be honest. 501c3s can engage in issue advocacy, including to support or oppose ballot measures. They can meet with legislators about legislation. They can actually take a stance on legislation. They can provide testimony in favor or in opposition to a bill.
Hey, Sarah,
Yeah.
are you supposed to be sharing your screen?
I am. Thank you for thank you.
I thought something was missing.
Thank you. Just jumped right in. Here we go. So as I was saying, 501c3s can do a lot. They can actually provide testimony and support or oppose legislation. They can use their actual 501c3 dollars to lobby as long as it's limited to 25% of their time. So, and 25% is actually a lot. One of my main job duties is to lobby. And if we're actually calculating the hours spent actively lobbying, meaning in publicly endorsing legislation or talking to a legislator about why he or she should endorse or oppose a piece of legislation, the actual time that I spend doing that lobbying is very low. Of course, there is a lot of activity that precedes the lobbying, like doing research, attending legislative hearings, working with you all to decide what our position is on bills, but that is not actually lobbying. So 501c3s can do a lot more than they traditionally probably think they can do. So don't be put off by the 501c3 designation. You can actually do some lobbying. Traditionally, 501c3s have leaned towards advocacy, meaning just educating people on the background on something. So, why it's important to do tobacco prevention in communities. But really, you can, as a 501c3, take a stance. However, 501c3s cannot endorse political candidates. So you stay out of individual candidate elections. You cannot make a contribution to a campaign, either monetary contribution or an in-kind contribution. And that would be something like allowing them to use your office space as their campaign office. And you cannot use federal money to lobby. So, but lots that you can do. And Justin, do you want to tell us about what government entities can and can't do?
Sure. And I think to be more specific, I think Sarah's really covering the what you can do when you're acting as an agent of CLHO and being a part of the CLHO network. When you are acting with your government employee hat on, so as the public health employee for your county, we are still allowed to meet with legislators, talk to legislators about how specific policy will impact people in your community. You are allowed to endorse or oppose legislation. And I know people often construe kind of the you as an electoral politics, endorsing a candidate or endorsing a ballot measure with legislation, and they're just frankly different. When you're talking about legislation, you are allowed to do all of these things. It's good to work with your county board in these conversations. They, of course, as elected officials, are allowed to endorse all over the board and engage in all of these activities. But you, as a county employee, are allowed to lobby on bills on your time, on your work time. I will say, I think we're going to talk about it a little later, but you do have to make sure that it meshes with the direction of your board. But you are allowed to do all these things as a government employee and as a public employee. What you can't do is a lot of the stuff that happens on the campaign trail. So you are not allowed to endorse candidates or ballot measures when you are wearing your public employee hat. You're not allowed to use resources, i.e. emails, phone calls, all of those things as a public employee when it's related to an election. The other thing you have to be very careful of, if you are receiving federal grants for programs in your department, you are not allowed to use those funds to lobby. And that means, so if you hire somebody because you've gotten a grant, that person should be kept out of the direct lobbying on resources. They have stricter rules at the federal level than they do at the state level. So keep them shielded from your lobby efforts. I will say, oftentimes we have employees that are partially funded with federal money and partially funded by county and or state money. You are allowed to cordon off their time and just make sure that it's being done when they are using their hat as a county public employee, and you can use that part. Next slide, Sarah.
Sorry, this is Jennifer for Klamath. Can I just ask one quick clarification on the previous slide?
Yep.
Sorry, we're in a different conference room and I don't have a raise hand button. So when you say like endorsing and opposing legislation, it was my understanding that you couldn't actually say, and I support ballot measure, whatever. I thought we couldn't even go as far as to saying that. I thought we could only say like, I support tobacco cessation, but you couldn't actually support.
You make the distinction right there. So if it's a ballot measure, you are correct. You cannot take a position on a ballot measure. If it's a policy issue that's in front of the legislature, then you can say, I mean, that's what it's a bill that, provides funding and or, statute to change tobacco cessation. You can say you support it.
Yes, and that's accurate, Jennifer, because you are a county-based public health department. Now, for Carrie or Bob, who are nonprofit-based entities, they can actually endorse a ballot measure, whereas as a county employee, you cannot. Does that answer your question? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, and so if you might be on mute if you're talking. Okay, we'll move on, but we can always come back to it at a later time. So here we go. So the first two steps to lobbying effectively revolve around doing so as part of your job. But as Justin mentioned, you don't want to get in trouble. So if you do want to talk to legislators as part of your job, wearing your county employee hat, or even your nonprofit hat if you're not the boss, you definitely want to make sure that you clear it with your boss first. It's also a great idea to coordinate with me if you're talking about public health issues, or with your internal government relations folks, if you have them, like Justin, if you're a Multnomah County person. Because if you're saying one thing and we're saying another, and the legislator hears both of those conflicting statements, it tends to cause inaction and we undermine each other's efforts. So we definitely want to coordinate messages, and we can also help you. Just make sure that you have a better experience when you are lobbying legislators. So I'll turn it over to Justin to cover this in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so I will say, there are two ways to do it. One is as, a private citizen, where you talk about where you're working, but you're not talking on behalf of your employer, and also as a constituent. But what we do actually at Multnomah County, and I think a lot of other counties do this, is we work with our board prior to the legislative session, because CLHO and others do such a good job of kind of mapping out what policies we expect to see during the legislative session. We talk to our board prior to the legislative session beginning. That way there's a clear understanding of where our county commissioners are on a certain issue. We've had the ability to talk to them about the issue, walk through it, and that makes our lives a lot easier, so that you then can go in as a county employee and talk about it, both as a constituent, but as an expert and wearing your hat as a public employee, and as a public health professional, and talk through those issues. So that, and I think that's my talking. That's what I'm supposed to say.
I'll just add that, if you decide to talk to legislators about an issue that's not related to your job, you obviously have that freedom as a citizen, as a voter. Perhaps you also own a rental property and you want to talk to them about landlord laws or whatever. You can absolutely reach out and lobby them on, other topics as well. You would just want to make clear that you're there as a constituent and you're not there as part of your employment. Other ways that you can get involved on your own time, you can of course donate to candidates, or you can donate to the Public Health PAC. Contact me for more details. Or you can volunteer your time on campaigns outside of working hours. So, you have a Saturday and you want to go knock on some doors to help out a candidate, you can absolutely do that on your own time, not as part of your employment.
And I will say one thing I forgot to mention was the Secretary of State has a handy quick reference guide to what public employees are allowed to do related to election activity. I put that in the chat. And I think, to go back to our prior question, there is a very bright distinction between election-related activity and lobbying. So if something is on the ballot, i.e. a ballot measure, a local referral, a candidate, those are election-related activities. And that the Secretary of State's document is a really clear way to understand what you can and can't do. When it is a legislative bill or even a policy in front of your board, that's when it gets into lobbying activity, which is different, and you have more ability to talk about opposition, support, and what the bill will do or the policy will do.
Okay, so this is a high-level overview of your action steps if you want to lobby effectively. The first step is to email your legislator to set up an appointment. And I highly recommend putting meeting request in the subject line, because the way they handle their email these days is differently than how people handled it 20 years ago. So on the right, I have noted the different types of meetings and ways that you can contact your legislator, and put them in hierarchical order. If I'm saying that wrong or right, I'm not sure. So the best way to lobby is in an in-person meeting. That's why you want to email your legislator and get a meeting set up. Having that face-to-face conversation is really just the best way to, one, make sure you have their full attention, and to have a really good back and forth dialogue. And it just sticks in their mind more if you're there in person in front of them. The second best way is a virtual meeting or a phone call. It's a little less effective because you don't know if you have their full attention, especially if they're driving and they're taking your call while they're driving. Obviously, you only have half their attention. If it's virtual, it's a little bit better because you can share your screen, but you also don't know if they're distracted by looking at their email or their text messages or whatever. The third best is to have a quick conversation in person at a large event. So let's say you both end up at a town hall meeting and you introduce yourself and you say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the public health workforce, but I need more time than you have here. Let's set up a meeting. Are you willing to do that? And almost always they will say, yes, here's my staff, get together with them, let's set up a time. Because in that environment, you might only have 2 or 3 minutes of their actual attention before they get pulled away to talk to someone else. So you want to make sure that you actually have dedicated time to communicate all the reasons why the public health workforce needs the help of the legislature. And finally, email is not an effective way to lobby. I know a lot of advocacy organizations rely on form letter emails as a way that folks can get involved and make their voice heard. I would say that is pretty ineffective. Once they get a couple of them, they're going to stop reading them and they're just going to file them away in under that, a folder with that issue topic. However, email is very effective for scheduling a meeting, and that is why it is incredibly important to have meeting request in the subject line so that you don't get your email filed away with all of the bulk email that they get. Justin, anything to add before we do a deep dive on best practices on how to lobby effectively?
Yeah, I think I would just double down on the email part of this. I think unless you have thousands of people emailing a legislator, it's just not helpful anymore. 9 times out of 10, the legislator actually never sees it, and the staff just files it away and maybe keeps a tally at best. It's like every legislative session we're in, email becomes less and less helpful at changing a legislator's mind on anything, or letting them know how you see an issue, because they just frankly don't see the email at all.
Exactly. So, Justin, how are we going to prepare for our lobbying meeting?
So this is, this actually, I will say, as legislators become more reliant on emailing themselves about their issues, it's important to subscribe to their email newsletters. You learn a lot about what a legislator is interested in, how they think about issues by reading their newsletters. And they are official emails, so you can get it to your work email. It's good to sign up. You can find out where they're in the community, what events they're going to, what their worldview on issues are. And it's really helpful to just get a sense on how to approach them and talk to them. Before your meeting, you've read up on your legislator, you understand them, you know what their prior history is, like what jobs they've held, where else they've volunteered. That way, if there's a connection you can make to the issues you're going to talk about, to their real world experience, it just doubly helps, makes them understand something, makes them feel as though they're an expert on an issue as you're talking to them about it, and they will engage more. As you get closer to your meeting, it's important to narrow down your topics. Don't go in on 5 issues. Don't go on world-changing issues. Keep it really close to the vest. No, you keep it to 3 or less, preferably less topics. You're only going to have at max 15 minutes. 5 of that is going to be taken up by introductions and pleasantries and small talk. So when you're down to 10 minutes, that means if you got 3 issues, you got 3 minutes to talk about each one and take questions and ask them a hard question at the end. So it's really important to narrow down your topics. The third part is practice your talking points. Be ready to talk about the issue. Have this conversation with coworkers, with family, with others, so that you feel well-versed in the issue. And I know you're all professionals, but the ability to talk to somebody about an issue in an uncomfortable space where you're going to ask them to either A, support it or oppose this issue, it's good to know that you know your talking points front and backwards and are comfortable talking about the issue, so that if they ask you a question mid-sentence and interrupt your flow, that it doesn't mess you up, that you're able to answer the question and then go right back to the flow. Super helpful. When you're talking about an issue, it's good to include data. Don't be all data. Include a couple key data points. Don't bowl them over with 37 different numbers. They're not going to remember any of them. Bring 1 or 2 numbers. Talk about the cost impact. Both how much does it cost to get something going, but also what's the return on investment? How is this going to either save the state money, save your community money, or save people in your community money? So have an idea of what those are. Not all policy issues are going to have that, but if they do, it's important to kind of know upfront cost and long-term return on investment. The third part is have a relatable story. Bring a story about a constituent who is impacted by this policy. Elected officials love nothing more than a good story that they can then share in a different venue. If you talk to them about Sally and how your tobacco cessation program helped Sally finally stop smoking after 40 years, and you bring a good truthful, you tell her background, you talk about her 10 times trying to stop smoking, and finally she was able to stop smoking because of your cessation program, that then gives them a story to tell other people. And legislators, we all know them, love to talk and love to tell a story. Bring a leave behind. And I call it a leave. You call it a leave behind because you don't start with this. It's a 1-page printed summary of everything you're talking about, all the data you've talked about. Don't hand it to them right off the start, because they'll start reading it and you can't read and listen at the same time. So it's important to hold on to that piece of paper and give it to them as you're leaving, so they have something to reference back on the issue and do a deeper dive. And finally, this is the most important part. Have an action request for your legislator. It is support your policy, oppose your policy, follow up on something, help you out with something. Make sure you have an ask every time that you go to meet with a legislator. Don't waste your time, don't waste their time. Have something to ask them at the end of the meeting, and make it a firm ask. Don't kind of, it would be great if you would support our issue. That's an easy one to go, okay, and then they leave, and then you're not really certain about where they are on the issue. Ask them, do you support? Do you oppose? Can we count on your opposition? Can we count on your support? And really try to get that yes or no answer out of them. Or it's a good time for them to give you their final questions about the issue. Maybe they haven't made up their mind, but if they knew X, Y, and Z, there might make it easier for them to make up their mind. Sarah?
Exactly. And so, especially if they have questions that they need answered before they make a decision, but in general, it's great to follow up. After the meeting, ideally within 24 hours, you want to send an email to the legislator, thanking them for the meeting, summarizing the discussion. You can include your ask again. You can answer any questions that they had that you didn't have the answer to at that moment, and attach your leave behind, your 1-pager. That way they have it in electronic, and in the electronic format. It's easy to send around to other people if they need to. So that follow-up email is incredibly important. And you can also offer to be a resource. As you're considering tobacco legislation in the future, please reach out to me for input. I would love to be included in these discussions because I'm very passionate and knowledgeable about this issue. So those are all the best practices, but there's a couple more things to mention here. Always, always, always be polite and gracious. You may have to try 3 or 4 times to get a legislator to support or oppose the legislation that you're talking about. They may disagree with you on the issue to start, but you can whittle away at them over time. So you don't want to burn a bridge on the first meeting because they're not quite there yet. You know, and oftentimes as their life experience evolves, they may come around to seeing things the way that you see things. So it really, you know, and as humans, we have to hear things several times before they really start to sink in. So consider it just part of the process that you may need to visit them and educate them more than once on your particular policy issue. And finally, I will say you want to put a note on your calendar to remind yourself to follow up with them after a week or two, depending on what your discussion. So if they are unsure if they're going to support your legislation at the end of the meeting, you can say, okay, well, I'll, you know, follow up and answer your questions. Is there a good amount of time for me to give you before I follow up to check in, see if you're going to support? And they might say, yeah, give me a week, give me 2 weeks, because I have to do X, Y, Z. And then follow suit and say, you know, say 2 weeks later, you send them an email. Hi, Representative, just per our discussion, I'm just checking in on this issue. It's been 2 weeks and I wanted to see if you've arrived at a support position. And that's super appreciated by them too, because they are busy people. They cannot remember everything they've promised to do. So a little gentle reminder is always welcome. And, you know, maybe they're not quite there yet. Maybe they don't respond and you have to follow up again, but it's all part of the process. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. So it's part of building a relationship. And there are a number of ways that you can build your relationship, because what it comes down, lobbying comes down to the relationship you have with the legislator and building trust. So the more that you encounter them, the more opportunities you have to make that connection, to build that trust, and to remind them who you are and what you can offer to them as a resource. So, and I'm sure you all are probably aware, but studies show that the more exposure we have to a person, the more fond that we will feel about them over time. So you may start out not liking someone very much, but because you're in a meeting with them every single week, over time, you grow to become fond of them. So really, the more often you show up to constituent coffees and town halls, the more you show up to volunteer on their campaigns, the more you contribute, the more they see you on their social media feeds or interacting with them on social media, the more you can meet with them during the interim, which would give you more time to have that meeting. Instead of 15 minutes, they might give you 30 minutes or maybe even an hour if you're lucky. So continue to build that relationship and just show up and be in front of them as much as you can. And again, you want to play the long game. It's about building that relationship and educating them over time. And you don't always get what you want on the first try. So you have to come back and try again. So don't give up. And then we can take it to the next level. And Justin's going to tell us how to do that.
So, yeah, I mean, this is all stuff that you want to do now before the legislative session begins, before you're talking about specific bills and specific policies. So the first is help build a coalition. I mean, we know the issues that we're going to talk about during the legislature. We're going to talk about, well, I guess from Multnomah County's perspective, we're going to talk about flavor bans. You know, we're going to talk about making sure that kids can't buy flavored tobacco. I don't know where CLHO is on that, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, we haven't officially supported it yet, but I anticipate that we will.
Okay, well, I will use that as my issue. So, you know, we've been working with other advocacy associations like the Cancer Society, the Heart and the Lung as well, I mean, others, just to make sure that it's not just us talking about an issue. We want to make sure that when legislators meet with us, that we have others coming with us, that we have providers who can talk about the impact of the policy on their patients. That the Cancer Society can talk about the impact of flavored tobacco in their world, so that everybody comes at the same issue, slightly different, but it gives a more global perspective on an issue. I know you all work with community partners on a number of issues. It's important to help bring them with you when you're going to go talk to legislators about these issues. Legislators find it more meaningful, and frankly, it's easier to share the load. So it's not just you talking about stuff all the time, that you have others validating what you're saying, and that they can also start to build these relationships with legislators.
And again, the more a legislator hears something, the more likely they are to internalize it and support it moving forward. So coalitions can be a great way to do that.
Yeah, it also helps build value in your coalition. Be an expert on what's going on in Salem. Make Sarah tell you what's going on in Salem so that you can relay that information to your constituents locally. So you can talk about where flavored tobacco ban is in the process, what the next steps are. This will help you build credibility with your coalition, and will help them make it easier to bring them to the table to help lobby legislators on these issues. The other part is bring legislators into your community, invite them to community events. We hold community events all the time. We sometimes don't think about inviting them. Legislators love to go to events, especially where they have a role. If you can give them a speaking event at one of your events, or speaking role at one of your events, or even handing something out at one of your events so that they get to meet their constituents in a different environment. They love coming to those things. I will also say that bringing them on tours, we bring legislators on tours all the time. We bring them out to see programs that we're running so that they can meet the people on the ground who are delivering the service and the people receiving the service. This helps build in their mind your expertise, but also the fact that you're out in their community doing good work. I will tell you, we hear all these bad things about politicians. I will say 99% of the legislators that we've worked with are real, genuine people who are actually trying to do better things and who are trying to make their community a better place. They may have different views on things than us, but at the end of the day, they actually do care about the people that they're serving in the legislature. So it's important to show them that you care as well, and that the programs you're doing in your community are to make the community a better place. So bring them into those things. If you're doing food pantries, we do a baby dental clinic where we bring in babies who don't yet have teeth, but they can get a vaccine, and they come into one of our offices, and then we start educating their parents about teeth coming in. And my God, legislators love baby dental day. I mean, just bringing them in to see babies and to see that good work, legislators attach to it and want to see more of that. The great thing also that we found is if we get legislators to then take pictures of it and post on their social media, we will hear from other legislators about it and say, hey, can I come to baby dental clinic and all those things. So you want to bring them into your community, and they will get excited about your community. I think we've already talked about the newsletters and social media, but it's important to just get to know your legislator. And it's not always just in their office asking them to support or oppose the legislation, but as Sarah was saying, spend time with them, bring them into your community, go to their things. They will start to trust you and reach out to you. One of the greatest things I love when lobbying, if I'm lobbying a legislator who's not from Multnomah County, and what they say is, I'm going to call my public health person, or I'm going to call my community corrections person. I love it when they say that, because then they're leaning back onto people who I trust to talk about these issues. And that there's nothing better when a legislator proactively reaches out to you to find out your opinion on an issue. And they only do that if they know you and they trust you and they've seen you doing good things in your community. And I'll stop there.
Well, I will say, though, you did skip over one thing, which is to give an award. And I know that the Multnomah County Health Department gives legislator awards at the end of, is it at the end of every session, or what's the cadence?
It's about every end of session. And I will be honest, those awards are more about creating the relationship than anything else. It's not for anything in particular. We don't give them an award for passing, House Bill 3355. We give them a bill or an award to say you're a champion because they've worked on issues with us. And so it's just a nice way to make them feel good about the work that they're doing and valued in our community. And it helps build that level of trust and connection with them. Because we all know, an elected official loves a good award. If you go into their office, you will always see about 30 of them hanging on their wall. So don't be shy, give them an award for something.
And give them the microphone for a few minutes to accept that award. Legislators love a microphone. So any chance they get to they get to connect with their constituents is a good one. And an award ceremony like that is appealing to both them and to the folks handing out the award, because they get that one-on-one time.
Yeah. And I would say, and don't think of it just as an award. You can give them like a certificate of appreciation, just thanking them, for their work in the legislature. Don't overthink it. Don't make it too difficult. Just, it's a reason to bring them in, to thank them for their hard work, and to make a connection with them.
Absolutely. And one last thing before we head on, I did put on here too, a hot tip to set up a Google alert. Most of you only have, one senator and one representative at the state level. And so you can easily set up a Google alert for their names so that you know what they're working on without having to read every single newspaper in the state cover to cover. So that's a tip in addition to the social media accounts. Okay, questions. We have lots of time, so give us your questions.
Hey, Sarah, this is Pat Ludke in Lane County.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what the thoughts are of the two of you with regard to managing our county commissioners in certain spaces. And, my experience, so here's one example. And you alluded to this a bit. They, of course, have their legislative priorities and they get them all together in the fall, preparing for the session. But there are other items, of course, that are of import. And if they're not number one on their list, you aren't supposed to speak to them and those sort of things. And so what are your thoughts on how we can advocate internally to work harder to get things on their list? And then if things are not on their list, but we think it's important from a public health standpoint, whatever it might be, like flavor bans or something, what are some strategies to effectively work despite those restrictions?
I would say that the first part is to talk to them when the pressure is not on. I find that it's much easier for me to have a conversation with my board members about a policy issue when it's not front of the stove, that it's a back burner issue at that time, and so that you can build a better understanding with them. I think it's also important, to lay out the policy framework so that even if your board is either in a, not taking a position or, in an opposite position, that you have policy papers that outline the impact of legislation, that you can talk about how an issue will impact your community. But I also get, we are public employees and we all answer to our boards. And it is important to walk a really fine line there of not going in opposition of your county board, because that can only create problems for you. I would also say you're lucky in having a government relations manager who is really good at this. And you should lean on Alex to help some of the board members into a better place where either they're agnostic on an issue, or that they're okay with the county having a slightly different position than they have.
Thank you for that. I'll give one more example that really isn't, not a contentious issue, it's just sort of a bandwidth issue. So for example, in my county, we need a new courthouse, and The one we have currently is, it's not wheelchair accessible. It's a real challenge for many people. And as usually happens, the state kicks in, a large percentage of that money. So the number one conversation amongst all conversations is going to be getting money for the courthouse. As anything else about tobacco tax increases or vaping, or all that stuff is not only further down the list, it may not even be close to being on the list. So sometimes we have sessions like that where it's just sort of one topic, and I'm not convinced that I have the skills or the experience, expertise to really get traction during years like that. Other thoughts?
Yeah, coalitions. We do this on a number of bills. We are in a similar situation where, we will likely have one or two kind of overwhelming issues that will take up a lot of our bandwidth. But what we talk to our board and staff about is joining coalitions or helping to form coalitions. And like I said earlier, many hands make light work. Those coalitions are really helpful. So whereas, Alex your government relations manager may spend all of his time on that courthouse, the ability to get approval for you to join a coalition, to participate in or help form a coalition or bring a coalition who can do all that work on the side, makes it easier to work on those issues.
And
Appreciate your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just back Justin up on that too. Because as the county, you can only have so many things that are a high priority. And so if you have a laundry list of 20 things that are your number one priority, essentially everything is your priority and nothing will actually probably get done. So because you need to whittle that down as a county to one or two things, maybe three things, the coalition is a really great place to go so that they can carry the bulk of the water on that particular policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions?
This is Jennifer. What would you say is the power of the AOC voice? Like, are they respected? And do they have a lot of influence?
I mean, they have some influence. I would say, yes, they are respected. I think it depends on the location. A lot of more rural counties that don't have their own government relations staff really rely on AOC to be their voice in Salem. And typically AOC has a decent track record on delivering for more rural counties. But they certainly don't have all the power they're not as like, Justin, do they make campaign contributions and that sort of thing?
No, and I would say that their true power comes in commissioners' direct engagement with legislators. So I would say, AOC as a whole has some, voice there, but their real voice is connecting local commissioners with their legislators, and that's where they get a lot of traction.
Yes, I would agree with that. So, oftentimes they will bring commissioners to Salem to meet with certain legislators on certain issues. And I think that's very powerful because it's that direct home connection and, meeting with other elected officials. So I think that it can be very useful in that way. Like, I know Kelly Minty Morris was very active when she was the chair of Health and Human Services at AOC, and probably made a good amount of impact in Salem when she was in that role. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more. This is Pat again. So this is kind of a selfish one, so I apologize up front. I have a legislator who I have a good relationship with. I'm really not convinced how it developed over the last 10 or 12 years, but she will call me and I will call her or text her. And she's very active in the health space. And, I always try to let Alex know, our government relations person, and sometimes it happens on a Sunday and I might forget to do it on a Monday, but I'm kind of curious. I feel in a little bit of a strange no man's land when these things happen, because there may be a conversation about an issue that's not on my commissioner's legislative priority list, but it's on the health interest list or health needs list. And I feel as though keeping this senior representative close is a good thing for my county, but it's a tightrope to walk. And I just wonder what your suggestions are on making sure I leverage that relationship to its maximum extent, and B, stay within, I don't know, the gutters on the bowling alley.
Justin, all you.
Oh, thanks. The way we talk about it to our folk in Multnomah County is I want them to be subject matter experts, and I want legislators to reach out to them, just like you're talking, to have these conversations with subject matter experts. I do request that all people, keep me in the loop on those conversations, because it may not even be about that issue. It may be about something else, some other issue. It may be about a bridge. It may be about a courthouse. But some of those kind of interplay, and it's helpful for me to understand what legislators are reaching out and talking about. I will say, if it's an issue that, isn't on, what I would tell my people, and I would say that you should ask Alex, this is what I would tell my people: if it's an issue that is not on our legislative agenda, that you should talk as an expert and talk about what your beliefs as an expert are on that issue. If it is something that is on our list of things that we either want or oppose, I would hope that you would have helped create that position and would be there supporting that position. I think the place where you're going to get in trouble is expressing strongly a contrarian view to where the county is headed, and I would suggest you would avoid that if you can. But that I think at the end of the day, your transparency internally to Alex and other people in your county will help keep their support of you taking those calls and having those conversations.
And I would
Thank
even
you for your
add,
thoughts.
yeah, and I would add that is a valuable relationship, and that you can, offer it up if, say, Alex needs to get a hold of that legislator on a particular issue. I mean, you can kind of leverage that to be a resource for your county and your government relations team should they need it, and can make that valuable to people on both sides of the text message. Any other questions? Give it just another minute here for folks to think of questions. And oh, there's something in the chat, and I'm terrible at monitoring the chat. Oh, just thank yous. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Next time we will talk about how to testify, and also how to write a letter to the editor or an op-ed. We're going to lean towards letter to the editor. So if there are no other questions, we can end for today and see you hopefully next week. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Justin, for joining us.
Thank you all for the work you do.